So over the last year, we've been working on a piece of looking at research and mapping research over the last 10 years. This work has been supported through the Research Collaborative. And the reason for doing that is that we need hard evidence of the chronic lack of research funding for MECFS from major funding agencies. And the reason for that is that we need, as a research collaborative, we want a basis to be able to take forward and say to the MRC, NIHR, Wellcome and others, look, we all know that there's a chronic lack of funding. We've now got hard evidence that you need to take into consideration and work with us in terms of changing the landscape. The results aren't surprising, but we now can use the report to influence in the way that I've just identified. In terms of the methodology, we worked with a company called Uber Research. They've got a database, dimensions database, that has over 200 of the world's sort of most influential funders in research. We know that there are gaps, it's not perfect data, and it doesn't include charities, for example, Action for ME do not input into the database. But it does give us the best snapshot that we've got of funding over the last 10 years. So within the Dimensions database, we looked at funding. I changed the slide this morning. I don't know why it doesn't say US in the blue bit. I did that. So we looked at the funding for MECFS over the last 10 years. There were 99 grants, not even 100. 99 grants that totaled around £49 million. There was some missing data within that, so that's not a perfect figure, but it does give us a snapshot. What we've got here is a graph that identifies the grants excluding the UK over the last 10 years, and it went up to the 31st of December 2015. And what you can see very clearly is that it varies from year to year, and there's funding for around 6 new projects each year on average in countries excluding the UK. And what we know is that that's very low compared with the level of global funding for other comparable illnesses. Most of the awards have come from the NIH in the States through its various different sort of panels or boards. And what we also know, and Stephen referenced yesterday, that in 2015 the Institute of Medicine issued its report, and we know that there has been a review of funding since then. What we've got here are the grants in the UK since 2007. What we again can see that there's only around 2 per average per year, which makes it very difficult for us to draw conclusions about the research. We know that that varies, and you can see the spike here, which is the MRC highlight notice in 2012. In the report, you'll be able to see a breakdown of the grants by institution and also by PI recipient. And in the UK, of the 20 grants that were awarded, 2/5 were for 2 researchers. There's no funding from other UK European funders such as the Biotechnology and Biological Sciences Research Council or the European Research Council. And I find that quite shocking, that actually they don't care enough, the quality of applications aren't good enough, the design of studies isn't good enough, whatever it may be. And it was interesting to ask the question yesterday from the panel, if you could change one thing, and I'm saying this for those that weren't here yesterday and for people watching via live stream. Our panel last night said, you know, we need more funding, but actually it's much more complex than that. We need better quality of applications, we need better study design. There's a whole number of factors that we need to take into consideration, not just more funding. Okay, so this gives you a breakdown of where the grants have come from, and the MRC obviously, particularly with the highlight notice, is the highest here. What we then looked at was funding compared with other neurological conditions. And in the Dimensions database up to December 2015, there were 34 international active grants for MECFS research, which was a value of around £17 million. To contextualise that, the UK's MRC funded around 2,000 active grants at that point in time, and the Wellcome Trust around 200 active grants. And what we can see, and you'll be able to see the detail in the report, is that MECFS is, not surprisingly, very low in comparison. So there's very clearly a disproportionate funding. For example, you've got ataxia telangiectasia. I listened to it on YouTube earlier on to make sure I could say that properly. That affects around 1,200 people in the UK compared to the 250,000 people estimated to have MECFS in the UK. And yet its research funding is almost twice as large. We also know that MS affects around 100,000 people, but has received 20 times the funding. Now, quite clearly, and one of the speakers yesterday said, you know, each of these illness groups deserves funding. We're not trying to say that ME should be prioritised over others. What we're asking for is something better for people with ME, something that's going to improve their lives, give them targeted treatments, and actually gives a level of equity and fairness. The impact and the cost of ME is high at personal level, at societal level, and at an economic level. What we found is that 0.02% of funding overall is given to ME/CFS. Now you might say, well, that may be commensurate in terms of the number of people with the illness, but if you look at the significant lack that we've had over the years, actually that figure needs to be an awful lot higher. And you've got the breakdown here. Okay, so in terms of the challenges, I'm very aware I've only got a couple of minutes, Esther. So just to finish off, we know that the scale of ME/CFS and the impact is very significant. That's not surprising, that's why we're all here. We know that research funding has been low and patchy, and we know that we need more skills and expertise. And we also need to think about the cost of ME/CFS in terms of the disease burden to take account of the numbers, the impact, and the scale of the issue. So what are we going to do as a result? The Research Collaborative has looked at the information, and we've been in consultation with MRC and with others. We know that we need to increase investment, and one of the things that the MRC has said as a result of this is they're actually going to review the report formally and review the highlight notice. And I think that's a major first step in terms of funding for ME/CFS. But actually we need more of that, and we've got colleagues here from Wellcome, we had colleagues here yesterday from NIHR. We will now write to each of the organisations formally, as well as those that are not giving any funding whatsoever, to encourage them to work with us to increase investment in research. We also are going to undertake a critical analysis of the categories of research funding to identify under-researched areas for future investment. And what we need to do now is to identify the areas where we really need to focus on, where we need to put some investment in terms of the study design, work with researchers, and enhance the applications that come in. And the last thing that we're going to do, and one of our colleagues, Mark Edwards, who's not here, he's in receipt of an MRC funded grant, is actually organising a group of the Research Collaborative Executive Board colleagues who are going to work together to offer advice to early stage career researchers, to actually review, to provide a level of review for their applications and to support them in being able to put applications forward to the mainstream funders. We recognise that people need support to be able to progress applications, and we want to make sure that that's in place. I just want to finish by saying that I'm not a researcher. It's actually quite daunting talking to researchers and presenting data, but the reason that we need to do this is because people with ME/CFS deserve better. We've had an incredible lack of research, an incredible lack of focus, and now is the time that we actually need to progress that. So if you haven't signed the mega petition, then please go ahead and do that. And please work with us, have a look at the report, and we'd really like to hear your feedback, because we will make this an ongoing process and keep the spotlight on research funding. Thank you.
Great. Sonia, fabulous start to the day, and thank you for keeping so well to time. And as Sonia said, she doesn't want to have any questions, although I suggest you all grab her in the coffee and lunch break. No, I thought Neha was going next.
No, it's Linda.
No, okay, great.
Perfect, thank you. I can introduce myself because I'm not on the programme. My name is Dr Linda Keir, and I am here to represent Wellcome, formerly the Wellcome Trust, now just Wellcome. And I'm here to tell you a bit about our research funding opportunities. And the aim really is to tell you how Wellcome funds research and to try and demystify the process and show what options are available. So what I hope to tell you about today is a bit more about who Wellcome is, for those of you that don't know, what our aims and structure are, what the scientific remit of Wellcome is, which helps us decide what projects we're going to fund, an overview of research careers to show that Wellcome funds projects from undergraduates all the way through to independent researchers, and then more specifically talk about the award schemes available for independent researchers, and then some of the newer schemes that we've opened up to fund team science approaches. And then finally how these applications are assessed, so that you know a bit more about the process, and this will hopefully help people feel that Wellcome is an accessible place to apply for funding. So Welcome is an organisation that is a bit different to other charities in that we don't source funds from the public and from donations. We fund research through our trust, which is a trust left by Sir Henry Wellcome after he died in the 1930s. And the remit of Wellcome is really to improve health for everyone, and to do this by helping great ideas thrive. And the main aim is to get that good health makes life better. And to do this, we have sort of 4 main aims: to understand health and disease, to improve health, to engage with the public, and that includes engagement with patient groups, and influencing policy. And Wellcome is structured in various different ways. We have very many different teams that sort of involve and feed into all these different processes. I am involved in the science part of this, and that is one way that we can fund researchers. However, there are many other teams involved, including our innovations team that help develop new technologies, link in with businesses, and also help fund translational research projects to try and improve technologies that go from the sort of basic medical science side all the way through into the clinic and making a difference to patient lives. We also fund different projects through our Culture and Society division, which funds researchers looking at the humanities, social sciences, and we do a lot of work with public engagement and education. We also have a policy team that don't fund research per se, but do get involved with different researchers to help lobby government and other organisations on subjects such as gene editing, mitochondrial donation, open access, data sharing, research practices, ethics, and such like. And all this is supported by our finance investments team, communications team, legal departments, and people in facilities. So now I'm going to just tell you about the science funding schemes. I'm part of the science team at Wellcome, and actually I am part of the physiological sciences, and I'm the lead for the physiological sciences portfolio at Wellcome. Our scientific remit is on the website. It's listed at the top of your screen here, and the very broad aim is to improve the quality of healthcare. And really this spans a whole spectrum of disease, both in sort of from a physiological perspective and normal physiology, all the way through to pathophysiology. And as you can see on the screen, there's sort of 6 main ways that we can fund science, and this goes from genetics and molecular sciences, identifying crystal structures of proteins, all the way through to population-based studies, which also can look at environment and impacts on health. Across all of these streams runs our research career streams, clinical research, of which I'm also involved with. I'm one of 3 clinicians who work at Wellcome. My background is as a paediatrician who worked in nephrology, but I also have a PhD and worked in cell biology as well. We're a new team, sort of particularly focusing on clinical research, and we were established at the start of 2016. We're headed by Professor Sarah Marshall, who is a clinical immunologist by trade, and we're currently working on our strategy for how to improve the way we assess clinical research projects at Wellcome. All of our science teams run across these 6 themes, and we also have international operations partners as well, because we don't just fund research in the UK, we fund internationally as well. So that gives you a bit of a background of our science teams and how we're structured, and now I'm just going to briefly touch on sort of how we support research across the career structure. I wasn't sure on the sort of makeup of the audience, but there may be people who are sort of going through some of these stages and developing the research career, and just to let you know that there are different schemes available for you out there. At an undergraduate level, we have a scheme that can be offered to both basic and clinical researchers, that includes sort of a period of 6 to 8 weeks where they can take a biomedical vacation scholarship and go and get experience in the laboratory to encourage access to research. We have postgraduate schemes that help fund PhDs and different programmes that are awarded to different institutes across the United Kingdom, and this runs on both the basic and clinical career side. Moving on to postdoctoral research, on the basic career side we have our Sir Henry Wellcome postdoctoral fellowships that allow researchers at the postdoctoral level to take their research further, and these are more than just your usual postdoctoral research facilities. They sort of allow people to travel between different labs and sort of start to take ownership of their own career direction, and mentorship is a really big part of this. On the clinical side, we have our clinical career development fellowships, which actually in 2 stages and can run for up to 8 years. Stage 1 starts at the postdoctoral level, but actually allows people to continue on to develop their early independence. And these schemes can run for up to 8 years. There's 2 competitive processes where you can enter at stage 1. You then have to competitively apply again for stage 2, but it does allow flexibility. So you may have some people who will do 3 years at stage 1, 5 years at stage 2, but this can shift and you can tailor it towards your own career development. From a basic science perspective, we also have our Sir Henry Dale Fellowships, which again allow the best researchers to develop and progress to early independence. And then finally, for those people who've had to take time out of research for any reason, if you've been out of a research environment for approximately 2 years, you can apply for our Research Career Re-entry Fellowships as well. And if anyone has any questions on these, I'm happy to discuss this further with you. However, we also have a Research Careers team with 2 named people for both the basic and clinical science streams, and they'd be more than happy to talk to anyone who's interested in finding out more. So now to talk about our specific funding streams, and these are more directed towards people who are developing independence or are established independent researchers. I'm going to briefly mention the seed awards in science, and all of the rest of the slides are sort of structured in a similar way, sort of telling you what the aim of each of the schemes are, roughly how much money and time are allocated to each one, who is eligible for the scheme and what is ineligible or what we're not really looking for the scheme, so that we get a better idea of what each scheme is designed to do. So the seed awards in science aims to help develop novel ideas that will go on to form part of a larger grant application. So the idea of the seed is you're planting the seed and you're giving a small amount of funds to collect proof of principle, pilot data that will then go on and allow you to apply for the bigger funds available. And this idea of going on and having a follow-up plan to move forward after the seed award is a really important part of the application. So these awards are can be up to £100,000 and can run over 2 years. Applications are considered by Wellcome 3 times a year. The important part of the eligibility criteria is that you must already have a salary in place for the duration of the award. So really these awards are targeted at new early independent researchers who might be new lecturers who have their post and their salary in place but don't have a lot of research funds available, but aren't quite at that level to apply for an independent sort of investigator award, which are some of the awards that we'll come on to in a minute. The idea is to sort of help them establish it and help these apply for the bigger awards, but also for researchers who are potentially developing their research along a new pathway, going into a new discipline or a new field. And again, it's very important that we fund projects that have a sort of clear remit, that are looking for proof of principle pilot studies, and this idea of knowing what you're going to do afterwards, what you're aiming for afterwards is a really important part of the application process. This is not designed to fund discrete standalone projects with no follow-up plans. It's not designed to be a sort of request for bridge funding. You can't hold this award if you've previously had a seed award or something similar. The good part about these awards is that they're not only considered 3 times a year, but the decision process is quite fast, and you can get a decision within 8 weeks, and the decisions are made by our seed advisory committee. So now to move on to some of our larger awards, which are designed to fund already established independent investigators. So the first is our Investigator Awards, which really aims to support the best independent researchers answering the most important scientific questions related to our scientific remit. These awards can be anywhere from 500,000 up to 3 million, although that is the very top limit. They can be up to 7 years, although in reality, people usually apply for 5 years of funding. And that would be more realistic, and we would advise you to sort of consider 5 years more than 7 in the first instance. Again, applications are considered 3 times a year. With the Investigator Awards, you also need to have your salary already confirmed, so you'd have an established post at your host institution. You have to show that you have a strong track record relative to your career stage, but you can apply at sort of mid-career, late senior stage, and also early career applications will be considered as long as you show that you're independent and that you're building up your track record and you're sort of on that upward trajectory. You have to have a suitable host institution, and there's a whole list of things that your host institution has to say how they're going to support you, and that's all illustrated on our website. The important part of writing a project application here is to have an overarching research vision that runs through the whole project application. And then you have to have a very clear plan of how you're going to answer this. And also with bearing this in mind, that it all has to be feasible within the time frame of the project. Again, these awards are not project or programme grants in themselves. They really are designed to sort of help not only foster your research, but also help you move your career forward and really to become a leader in the field. And we also do feel that the projects that are funded by the Investigator Awards have to be quite distinct from any other research funding that you've already acquired. The interesting part of the Investigator Awards is that if you feel that you and a colleague work very closely together and have complementary skills, you can actually apply for one of these awards together as a joint investigator. And we are seeing more of these sort of coming through. We would say if that was something you were considering doing, to come and talk to us about it early so that we can give you more advice on how to do that. Moving on, the next awards that I'm going to talk about are our Senior Research Fellowships, and we have two of these, again, sort of paralleling the tracks of both the basic and clinical careers. These fellowships are really, again, designed to support the best independent researchers answering the big questions in the field, and really are designed to encourage people to become really the top leaders in their field and internationally recognised. These are big awards up to sort of 1.5 to 2 million, again covering 5 years, and they can be renewed after that 5-year period. Again, applications are considered 3 times a year, but preliminary applications are required for these awards. To apply, you have to have about 7 to 12 years postdoctoral experience, be developing this international track record, have sponsorship from your head of department, and again, similar to what was said with the Investigator Awards, is to have this overarching research vision, addressing an important scientific question and a very clear strategy on how to answer it and to be feasible within the time frame. You're not eligible to apply if you already hold an established post, so the difference between the Senior Fellowships and the Investigator Awards is really this idea of if you have an established post at a university, you apply for the Investigator Awards. If you don't, you apply for the Senior Research Fellowships. The caveat to this is if you have a very good reason to move institutions, you may still be eligible to apply. You also can't hold a senior fellowship from another source, so another UK funding agency, and you can't apply for any other welcome fellowships in the past. The clinical schemes are very similar, but obviously designed for clinician scientists, either with a medical, dental, veterinary, or clinical psychology qualification. Usually you have a PhD or a master's degree, and probably about 4 years postdoctoral experience, and usually have completed clinical training. Again, you have to be an independent researcher with a really strong track record with sponsorship from your head of department, and this idea of being on an upward trajectory and becoming that sort of international player in the field. Similar advice on the project to the previous applications as well, so we'll repeat that, and similar sort of ineligibility criteria from the basic science fellowships. Again, if you have any questions on any applications, if you're not sure, the best thing to do is to contact us. We are very approachable. We have some information on our website, but we're more than happy to set up meetings with people to talk about your specific situation in more detail. In fact, a lot of what I do is talking to people pre-application and giving realistic advice on which scheme you should be applying for if you're competitive, and can give advice on project structure and grantsmanship. Finally, I'm going to talk about some of our team-based science awards. One of the newer ones that you may or may not have heard of is the Collaborative Awards, which seems particularly appropriate to talk about with this audience. The aim here is to really promote and develop new ideas and speed the pace of discovery. And the idea is to fund teams of researchers to work together on the most important scientific problems that cannot be solved by one group alone, and really have to be solved through collaborative efforts. These are big awards, up to £4 million over 5 years. Again, they're considered 3 times a year, and again, you need a pre-application before submitting a full application. Essentially, the eligibility for these awards includes having a multidisciplinary dream team. So you want a group of between 3 and 7 researchers who are the big players in the field, who have different skills, expertise to come together to answer the big question that could not be tackled alone. There's one administrative lead, and the one rule is with this that the administrative lead has to be based in a UK, Republic of Ireland or lower and middle income country. But other collaborative members of the team can be from anywhere around the world. So you can have a researcher from London collaborating with sort of someone from the US, Australia, and all over the world to answer these questions. You must have a salary for the duration of the award, and the idea of the project is this big research question that could really transform your field. You can't apply if you are a researcher outside the UK, Republic of Ireland, or middle income country and want to be the lead researcher. And if you're a group of 2 people, we generally don't advise the collaborative awards as being an appropriate way to fund your research. We would push you more in the direction of exploring the options of a joint investigator award. So now I'm going to tell you briefly how these applications are assessed, because sometimes it can be quite daunting to not know how the application is going to be looked at, and just this can sometimes help demystify the process. So as I mentioned, some of these awards, the Senior Research Fellowships and the Collaborative Awards, require a preliminary application. This is submitted to Wellcome, and it really just goes through an eligibility check to make sure you're able to apply for the awards and to see if you're going to be competitive for the schemes. That will then, a proportion of these will then be invited for full application. The Investigator Awards are slightly different in that they can come straight in with a full application, and there are actually PDF copies of the applications on our website as well if you wanted to look at that in more detail. Following submission of a full application, we have a series of expert review groups which are really cover the 6 main criteria of our science funding stream, so from genes and molecules all the way through to population, environment and health research. These expert review panel groups are made up of sort of specialists in the field, but with something like physiology, which is a very large field, we try and glean people from across many different specialties. There won't always be super subspecialists in your particular area of interest, but they will have a general scientific background in the field, and they will assess the applications to see if they then go on forward to be interviewed. At this point in time, probably about 60% of all applications submitted will be unsuccessful, so about 40% move forward, and they go in for the sort of subspecialist peer review, which goes out to experts across the world to give us their opinion on the suitability of this project. After peer review, the application will go to our interview panel, and this is a very general interview panel made up of different people from, again, across the 6 different funding streams of Wellcome. So you have to bear in mind these sorts of 3 different groups of people that might be looking at your application when you write it at this point, because it could be potentially looked at by several different audiences, and you have to sort of pitch it correctly. And so what we generally advise people to do is get people not only in your field to read the application, but also out with your field as well, just to give you a sort of step back perspective and take that higher view approach to see if they can read it, if it's accessible, and sort of give you a bit more honest feedback about that. Of those applications who make it to interview panel, about 50% are successful. So the overall success rate of applications that are assessed in this way is about 15 to 20%. There are different ways that applications are assessed as well, and it can be a little bit tricky to talk about all of them, but we will go over that if you wanted to talk about any specific schemes independently. The last scheme I'm going to talk about is the Biomedical Resources and Technology Development Grants, which again could be of interest to this audience. These are aimed to help researchers establish and maintain resources or technologies for the benefit of a wider scientific community. So this is sort of more core infrastructure type things, but again with the sort of advent of biobanks and cohorts and things, these are becoming more and more useful to communities of researchers working together to share resources. These are, again, big awards up to 1.5 million over 5 years. They're only considered once a year by a specialist panel called the Biomedical Resources and Multi-User Equipment Committee, and there's no interview required, but again, they do require a preliminary application. To be eligible for these awards, you must have an established academic research post and a salary for the duration of the award. You must have a track record obtaining grant funding, And you must show the importance and the impact of this resource and technology. You've got to show that there's a real need in the community and have a clear plan of how this resource will be managed, and also to have plans for longer term sustainability past the sort of 5-year duration. You're ineligible to apply if it's a research that's really only being used by one group or institution. We want to see that this is actually going to be really useful for not just your own institution, but for others across the UK and the wider audience. And that's all I'm going to talk about today. So to summarise, Wellcome is committed to funding research to improve health for everyone by helping great ideas thrive. There are numerous funding streams available to people from different career stages, and we are more than happy to talk through anyone who's interested in applying for any of our schemes. And there are new awards that support collaborative team science and shared resources. And with that, I'm going to end. A lot of information can be found on our website. If you go to the scheme finder, there's lots of information there. We're happy to be contacted, and each scheme page has contact information and leads. And there's also a science page detailing who to contact for if your research falls into any one of our 6 scientific areas. Thank you very much for your time.
Great, thank you, Lindsay. Actually, after multiple note discussion with Neha, we're going to take some questions now. All of you know about MEGA. Do we have MEGA slides? It's coming up. So we're going to go, just for those of you, I think you all know, we're going to go for the biotechnology resource application in January. I think they've just moved the date from November to January. And that's to set up the resource. That's why MEGA's there, because we're desperate for all the patients and all the researchers to say it's a resource they're going to use. And then we're planning to apply for the collaborative grant once we have the resource. So everybody, your instructions for coffee breaks and lunch are to be super nice to Lindsay, please. Because we think Wellcome's going to sort this field out for us. And now, are you happy to take some questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, we thought we'd do a few questions now, and then some after Neha, and then some joint questions.
The risk is that those subjects for which there is a stronger evidence base will be... Sorry, it's Chris Ponting, University of Edinburgh. The risk is that those subjects which have a strong evidence base, for which many researchers have studied for many years, will be better funded, despite the, as we've heard, the considerable need in areas that have a thinner research evidence base. Is there any way that the Wellcome can sort of pump prime this area in a way that supports the needs of the community?
We don't really generally sort of do pump priming for sort of research areas of need. We do sort of do more sort of outreach programs, so talking to researchers and things like that, but we haven't got any way of sort of looking at pump priming per se. I guess what Wellcome does more so is sort of take that higher approach and sort of works quite closely with other funding agencies, specifically disease-specific ones. So, for example, we've been working quite closely with Marie Curie, who have an interest in promoting sort of palliative care researchers who have similar sorts of issues as I guess the CSSM community have. And so we sort of do it, rather than giving sort of upfront research funds for pump priming, we sort of do it more in collaboration with other funders who do have facilities to do that and sort of help share resources. We also have priority area right now within Wellcome looking at diversity and inclusion, and that's not only in terms of sort of women in science and sort of who works at Wellcome, but also in terms of how we are assessing grants, applications, and who's coming through the door, and any barriers that there might be to people feeling that they can come and talk to us, and also being aware that it may be seen that because we are geographically based in London, we're not accessible to other people to come and visit us and talk to us, but we're more than happy to sort of set up teleconferences, Skype, to access researchers from other parts of the UK as well.
I could see you itching to ask a question there. Fidgeting in your seat.
And Dave Patrick from University of British Columbia, Lindsay. when it comes down to assignment of specialists and subspecialists to review these grants, have you put some thought into what they would look like? And I'm speaking from the other side of the pond, where that's been the obstacle for the Canadian Institutes of Health Research so far. They've had specialists who are not sufficiently knowledgeable about the potential for a biological pathway here, that they've tried to block things early on.
Yeah, and actually it's something, again, with the diversity inclusion work that's been going on at the Trust. We have been looking a lot at panel membership and also our interview panel as well, particularly from feedback from people who felt that the interview panel setting can be quite aggressive, and there's some work going on looking at sort of the pros and cons of interview and interview style. And actually we're probably going to be changing the structure of our interview rooms to try and make them more friendly environment, if that's possible. But we do spend quite a lot of time sort of looking at the mix, and also after each meeting that we have with our expert panel, there's a sort of debriefing session as to how things went and what worked well, what didn't go so well. So it is an evolving process. And we do find that because we bring lots of different researchers together, the dynamic can change quite a lot. We do have a sort of set panel of people who are on these boards, and again, they're all listed on our website, so you can find out who's on them. But also just to say that we're conscious that we can't have experts from every field, and so if there's an application that comes in that we don't feel our panel has specific expertise for, we will ask for a co-opt, which is someone who will come in just to sit on the panel, either the expert review group or the interview panel, to specifically look at that application, and they will be an expert from the field. So we are very conscious that we want the right people looking at the applications and making assessments with a good sort of experience. And these panels are made up from people not only from within the UK but also across the world. We have people who come in from Europe, the US, Australia to make sure we're getting the best advice possible.
Right. If there's no more questions, let's get Neha up from the MRC. Thank you very much. Obviously, one of our most generous funders. And I'd like to also thank both the MRC and the Wellcome for supporting this event. And while she's getting her microphone attached, just for everybody listening on live streaming and everybody here, we need your support to apply for MEGA in January. Please click on the change.org site and support the biggest study to date in ME/CFS. Now you see, there is an issue with microphones and inappropriate dresses. Should have been warned.
Good. Right, morning everyone. My name is Neha Issar-Brown and I'm representing the Medical Research Council, and may I say I've never had such a generous introduction ever before. Well, thank you very much for that. The topic I was given, or we were given, was enhancing research funding applications into CSSM. I realize, having not been here yesterday, a lot of what I'm going to say may have been covered. You've already discussed it in your working groups and so on. So that should teach me a lesson for not attending day one. However, I also realize that this topic is not just for me to speak as a funder, but also for everyone here in this room to consider as applicants or as the research community, because I alone, or MRC, or Wellcome Trust, or any other funder alone cannot enhance applications of research funding applications into this field. So, very briefly, if I can manage to...
Bottom one.
The bottom one. Yeah.
Sorry?
Bottom.
Oh, that's the dictaphone.
Oh, sorry. How do I turn this off then?
No, just leave that.
Just leave it?
Yeah, leave it.
Okay, sorry, that's not a very good start. There you go. Right. Again.
Bottom button.
What am I doing wrong?
It's just...
See, it wasn't just me. Anyway, what I was going to cover today was, and again, I wasn't aware of what the audience, how many early career researchers or established researchers they're going to be. So what I thought would be a sort of a mix of both, and some things I'm just going to lightly touch on and steer you in the right direction, and others we'll talk more about. So Very quickly, I'm just going to take you through the MRC structure, as in where to find the money. I'm not going to go into this in detail. As Lindsay said, we also have our websites and with all the information, and people like myself who you can contact. You can also grab me at lunch, but not all at the same time if you want to know more. Some clever pointers. These are resources already out there who can tell you which scheme may be good for you, which career stage, who to speak to, which team member to speak to, and so on. And I think I'd like to concentrate most on the last element, is what will make a successful CFSME grant. Now, obviously, that is a very high bar, I've said. We can't all answer it, but just some questions that have come from our experience of having seen some of the applications in this area. Do I have to say?
Bottom one, yeah.
This one?
Yeah, bottom one.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Middle one back up.
Yeah, got it. Okay. So this is an oversimplistic structure of the MRC, and Hugh here would agree with that. He knows how complicated all this is. But the reason I've just put this up there is so for you to know these are the first places you can go to when you're looking for funding in CFSME. In the grey with the red letters are the 4 research boards, which are divided by sort of the remit areas which they serve. And the first one is the Molecular and Cellular Medicine Board, which does everything as it says on the tin, where it's concerning the molecular mechanisms and so on, or sort of cellular experiments and cell-based experiments and research. Then is the IIP, or the Infections and Immunity Board. Again, as it says on the tin, it covers all the remit in that area, including infections, which may or may not be associated with other diseases. Then we have Hugh's Board, which is the Neuroscience and Mental Health Board. Again, I don't have to go into more of that. It explains what it does. The last one is the board that I am a part of, which is the Population and Systems Medicine Board, which basically is everything. Because it's population, it's systems medicine, where we're trying to look where different elements of a particular organism, or actually not an organism, of the human being, may be affected by different aspects of the physiology, different organ systems, and so on. At the moment, most of the grants that we see into CFSME come into Population Systems Medicine Board because of the nature of the grants. Maybe it's because it's dealing with epidemiology, it's dealing with population studies, and so on. But there is no reason you can go to any of the you cannot go to any of the other 3 boards as well. Then on top layer, another layer on top of that are some groups or panels that cut across all these 4 boards, which says that actually it could be in any of these areas, but they are meant for specific groups. Either they are meant for early career researchers going to their way to independence, and they, Training and Careers Group has a lot of schemes, fellowships, and so on, similar to what Lindsay has described, Wellcome Trust. The second one is an interesting one, is the Methodology Research Panel. And recently, although I cannot reveal, we've just had the first CFSME application in that panel, and that's very encouraging, because Methodology Research Panels deals with everything where researchers are looking for new methodologies, new ways, new study designs to capture or to conduct research in a particular area, which may or may not be applicable more widely, but at least it's a methodology specific for that area. Be it how you're going to look at certain, basically how you're going to look at a certain population, how you're going to get the maximum information out of that, how will you design your studies, and so on. And the last is the Translation Research Group, which I think is something in the future this area can aim for, but that is basically when you're translating your basic biomedical findings and taking them out and actually saying that this is translatable more into, let's say, therapeutic uses and so on. So again, as I said, this is very, very simplistic. This is not to say these are the only schemes. There we do also do some strategic initiatives, very time-limited ones, and you'll have to, obviously keep your eyes out to see if anything like this comes up. The collaborative is another good place where we keep talking about things that may be coming up, which may be of relevance to you. The other reason why I put this slide up there is, I think there was a question earlier as to whether or not there are expertise on CFSME or biomedical expertise or those biological expertise to judge these applications, and whether that lack is the reason that some of these applications are not going through. So the answer to that, as Lindsay also said, we try our best to get people who are best to assess your grant and be able to actually review it. And it's a 2-step process. We go out to external reviewers, some of whom are in this room. So you are the reviewers sometimes for the grants in this field. and the others are who are sit on the board. But I'm going to ask you a challenging question back. The boards that we make up, we try to make our boards representatives of the field. So we have experts on the board who can assess, the majority or represent that field. If you are not applying enough to MRC or anywhere, what is the justification I can have to have a CSFME expert only on the board when they have to mostly deal with vast number of applications from different fields by CSSM? This is a question for both of us. So if I could actually end my slide here and say the way we can enhance more application, I would say you have to be in it to win it. So including having experts on the boards and panels and having more people out there to speak for this community and for the research and understand the challenges and so on, although the funders try their very best to get the right people in the room or their comments, you have to understand that we really, really, really need to increase the number of applications and the quality of applications coming into this field. Sonia's report, which was very, very difficult, which was a mammoth task to take, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room understand that, others maybe not. But one thing which we cannot do in that report, which was out of the scope of that report as any, was the success rates. Have you ever wondered how many applications you've put and how many have been successful or not? So I think it's a two-way dialogue we all need to have to understand what are the barriers to actually getting the kind of investment we're getting in this field. So anyway, so that's just the structure. I'm not going to touch on the different career stages. I put this slide up here to say that we do fund, as most funders support, all career stages through a research career. It's here in this schema. It tells you for the non-clinical and clinical what kind of different schemes we have. Again, I'm not going to go into it. Also, I can circulate this later. This is also on website, which tells you for each career scheme what are the kind of eligibility criteria that you need to fulfill and so on. And finally, I'm going to just give you a snapshot. This is a very elegant interactive framework that a careers team has developed. It's on our website, where you can actually have an interactive map throughout the careers to say which stage you are at, what are your options, and how to go forward to the next stage. So for the early career researchers in this room, please do go have a look. For the established ones, please do do tell your lab members and their team members to go and have a look at it, because it's very helpful. It's actually also very helpful for those who are thinking of careers outside or alternative careers outside of mainstream research, but actually the point here is to get more into research, so don't get too excited about that. Right. So I think yesterday you may have spoken, you may have discussed this a lot. Let's try and make this more about CSFME. So all these things that I'm going to show you are applicable to any area. It is not specifically for this one. But let's, as we go along, try and find out, and I hope at some point there'll be a dialogue to see where we are lacking, where we're not perhaps hitting that sweet spot which gets you funded. So these are the clear elements. We all know this, emphasis on, and if you are looking at early career, then that could be one of the ways in which you can get this field or some funding in this field. If you can show that there's an early career investigator and they're actually taking this area, they're taking it forward as well as building their career. But that's not always the case. We also have established researchers who need investment. So a very clear rationale. Now that sounds very simple. The thing with CFSME and many other areas is that there are so many gaps, as the report has also shown, that often there is a tendency to try and put everything into your grant, try and answer each and every question, which is very confusing. It's very confusing, especially for reviewers who may or may not be in your field, to say, well, if we don't know anything, why do we want to know everything right now? Where is the first step? So whichever area you've chosen, whatever aspect you've chosen, start with that and build on that. Methodology, I've only put it in bold, but I hear that there was a lot of discussion on it, which includes study design. What are the limitations? What do you have? Do you have the right numbers? Do you have the right statistical power? Is your design correct? Are you following? Are you covering all the bases and so on? I'm not going to go more into detail because I understand this was discussed yesterday. People, environment, training for fellowships, okay, well that's something that, yes, we can think of, but that's more generic. Collaborations. As we know, and as the report has pointed out, there's not enough people in the field, but there are many questions. And the questions have to be tackled from different areas. So you have to look at immunology, you maybe have to look at sort of the neuroimmunology angle, you have to look at trials, you have to look at epidemiology, you have to look at the basic mechanisms. Maybe you can look at fatigue as a sort of a bigger umbrella and then stratify within that. There's so many different elements. Clearly, we need to somehow collaborate with experts in the field. If we can't bring them into the field directly, maybe the collaboration on your grant and so on could be a way to start those things. Or at least when you're writing a grant, when there is very little known, if you say, well, in that and that area, this is what was shown, we think there are some similarities, we think this is, I mean, I'm obviously talking it in a very simplistic term. What I'm trying to say is that it definitely needs some new ideas, new bloods. Again, something we've discussed over and over again. It's not new to this field. I think the last one is more for the early career researchers. Don't rush, plan it in advance and so on. I don't think I need to preach to this group who are very experienced in doing your applications. Now, the expectation that if you do all that, and again, this sounds very simple, you will be successful. And the main reasons why applications fail are these. So this is general, not again CFSME, but what we'll do in the next slide, we'll try to figure out which are the ones that affect us the most. So you're unfocused. It's overambitious or it's underambitious. Actually, it's most of the time it's overambitious. Everybody wants to do everything, especially in this field. People think that, well, I'm going to look at the biomedical, and this is from my experience of getting some of the grants, we're going to look at it from every angle, but in one application. Well, that's not going to happen. That's not going to get people, excited about your plan and that you're going to achieve something. It's unoriginal, there's no clear hypotheses, or there's too many, methodology not sufficiently detailed. Again, this was discussed yesterday. Lack of infrastructure and facilities. Now, with things that are happening, and in this case, the infrastructure and facility is not so much relevant. I think what is relevant more in this field is the numbers. And I think with initiatives such as MEGA, where you're trying to build a resource, that question, or at least that limitation, can be addressed to a large extent. So please do think about it. That is something that's going to benefit the entire field. And that may also benefit your research proposals once that resource has been set up to be able to go and use that. Training element and so on, again, I think at some point when we're ready, we have to start talking of training in this field. Right now, what we need is to retain the people we have, to make sure we get enough grants, to make sure we get enough collaborations and get other people. And then clearly, sometimes the right person, wrong project, and vice versa. That is a very generic one. And like any other grant application, you have to think about that as well, whether it's the right stage, whether you're just sleeping ahead too much, and so on. So I want to now just spend a couple of minutes asking people in this room as well and saying, why do we think the applications fail? And that's for those who have been successful and those who fail. I know you would have discussed a little bit yesterday, but can somebody just start with 3 maybe key points that the field thinks are the reason? Anyone?
I think there's a real problem with the field, and that is that success breeds success. And if you haven't had any success for a long time, when the first grant comes in, nobody's seen one of these before. So I chaired a meeting on Monday about eating disorders and self-harm. So eating disorders in the UK, there's 750,000 people with eating disorders, mostly young people, not in comparable age groups, but many of the people that you're talking about here. In the 5 years that I've been associated with the Neuroscience Mental Health Board, 1 grant has come in. 1 grant. Okay, so CFS is not peculiar in that it has a large number of patients to represent, and there's a lot of research to do. There are other areas too. And somehow, for reasons that I don't really understand, people don't submit grants about eating disorders, which seems, frankly, quite extraordinary, given what there is to do. But the same applies here. There aren't enough grants coming in, there aren't enough people in the field, and if I refer to what Paul Little said yesterday, there is another problem for this field, which is it has a perception from the outside of negativity towards some aspects of research and indeed some researchers. And whether you like it or not, this will antagonize people. Or if I'm a young person, do I want to enter a field where I know a senior person has been hassled to the point that actually they get sick of it? It seems to me this is a very simple issue. So if we want to take the field forward, the first thing is success breeds success, so we have to find a really sensible way that's going to make a difference. And I think just doing more and more small studies, little bits and pieces, is not going to help us. And until you get a momentum of positivity and the submission for big grants by people absolutely committed to it, you won't get that feedback loop. And I think it is a significant problem for the field. So the perception from the reviewers, the referees, is we don't see much of this. Where's this come from?
Yeah.
So it is a
Absolutely.
negative. So I think it's a problem. It's a perceptual problem that has to be overcome.
Thank you. I'm Sue Waddle from ME Research UK. Sorry, is that better? I understand what you say, but I do think it's important that we emphasise the positivity. If we want people to be positive about doing research, we've got to understand that over the last 15 years, we've now funded about £1.8 million worth of research. It doesn't sound very much in the grand scheme of things when you think about the money that's been spent on cancer, but it's a large amount for a very small charity. We have great researchers. Some of them are here today. I haven't had anybody come to me and say they've been hassled, hounded, they've had threats. So I think we need to start just being a bit more positive within this community. The researchers, if anybody here that we funded has had this problem, then please come and tell us, but we just don't see it.
No, so I think you're both right in a certain way, but I think what you said and what you've said is sort of two faces of the same thing. You need more people, you need more positivity. That's what you're saying as well. We'll bring it back to some of the research questions soon, but we'll hear first.
So concretely, our experience has been good with NIH, and then recently a little more challenging with CIHR. And the basis of that challenge, as I was raising before, is that you get peer reviewers who cite authority rather than experiment. And so you get a traditional psychiatric view, this is a functional somatic disorder, ergo don't bother looking for biomarkers, or what have you. It's circular reasoning. I don't think any of us should be accepting circular reasoning on our peer review panels.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And I think with this is something we've thought of in great deal here, and at the MRC at least, can't speak for any other factors. What we are trying to encourage is not a circular view, but a more holistic view. So we don't actually say only look at one aspect and the other. We're actually trying to encourage that maybe you need to think of it more broadly, which is slightly different from a circular view, which is more into, look at it from a different angle. Hugh, you were saying something.
I think you're absolutely right, David. And the last thing we want is people with prejudice.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have this, it's not peculiar, this I'm currently reading grants for triage. And it's surprising how many reviewers simply write what's in the grant and then give it a score. It seems to be almost random. And then there are other reviewers who just have prejudice that they don't like it. I didn't like it, it's never articulated. But we have, that's why we do the triage. And we weed out those kind of reviews. But it is the review process. One has to remember, it's not the MRC or the Wellcome or the whoever that turns down the proposal. It is peers. We do try to moderate it, as I'm sure that Wellcome does as well, as carefully as possible. But there is a perceptual component of our field, and there's no doubt that success breeds success.
Well, just to kind of feed into that a little bit, giving a first-hand experience of having fallen at the feet of reviewers holding bloodied axes in their hands.
Julius, there you are.
Sorry, I'm Julius Burke. I'm from Barnsley Medical School. One of the problems that we've had is, I think, in terms of the reviews that have been used, Now, we are asked, I forget how many it is now, but actually you can give quite a large number now of proposed reviewers. And certainly in our most recent grant, which we submitted over a year ago now, that wasn't successful, the reviews that came back, it was abundantly clear that it was not, those reviews were not made by a single person we have advised. Now, in such a contracted academic population as this one, it's increasingly important that actually the reviews we suggest should be used. And if the MRC is going outside of that circle, we're immediately placed at a significant disadvantage because the very people who should be commenting are being deprived of being able to do that.
So one of the, I'll answer, you know, I see your point, but what you have to remember, and as you said, it's a process. We cannot be seen to be biased towards one thing or the other. We have a process for going out to reviewers, which you've suggested. What you don't know is that maybe, and that's something I know from the other side, is that a lot of the people, including in CFSME, going out decline to review. And that again is this field. You're in the room. The reviewers are here in the room, you know. So answering your first question, whether we go outside the ones you've suggested, if we've done it, there must have been a reason, whether it's a decline or we consider there was a conflict, which maybe you as an applicant did not, you know, you were too close to see, or you know, but we have to apply the same rule across the field. Doesn't matter how underfunded or overfunded the field is, those rules of peer review have to be consistent. And as you said, peer review is an inexact science. It's not that, you know, it is the Wellcome Trust or MRC or NIHR process. There is a process. It's precisely for the reason to make it robust, to make sure that we have the right expertise. But when a grant comes to you next time, please don't decline to review it, because you might be the one who's making that difference.
So the figures are, for every reviewer, 3 have to be asked at least. Okay, at least 3 requests to get 1 review. And it's getting worse, it's not getting better. That's the first thing. The second thing is, you don't know that the people who gave you the review were not the people that were on, you named. And we have seen, you know, people who have been named giving both positive and negative reviews. It comes in all flavors. So I think, you know, I often hear young people say, I'm sure this review came from X, from blogs, you know. I can tell. Oh, good on you, you know. You don't know. And I have to say, I think if we try to do the process, the MRC tries to do the process, as do all the funders, as fairly as possible. But we are dealing with human beings, and, you know, they're tricky.
And the numbers that you mentioned, you know, for some, you will see some grants where we've gone out to 25 people. You know, and it's amazing. And what do you do to that? So again, it's the field, you know, basic person and so on. Right.
I was just going to say, at Action for ME, we are struggling for peer reviewers at the moment. I've asked so many people and I'm still struggling to get people. It's delayed the process by at least 2-3 months because we haven't got people that will say yes. And I think that's down to some of it's prejudice and a stigma with ME. I also think it's down to the fact that people are really busy. There's only a small number of people being asked repeatedly and people don't have the capacity. So I do think it is a real issue that we haven't got quality peer reviewers who are available and accessible to be able to assess applications.
And to get around that, I mean, we can't suddenly have peer reviewers if they're not, if there's no community. So what do you do to get around that? Again, you have to collaborate. You have to make sure that your research becomes more visible in that sense. You make sure you have the right collaboration so there's understanding of where it is coming from. As you said, if this is the one grant we see and it's coming from nowhere, then, you know, who knows what? And how do you, where do you start? Where do you start to look at it, compare and so on?
So an important bit that nobody ever talks about, of course, people have to be trained to be reviewers. Right? So I have young people in my lab, postdocs, who I ask to review a grant, and the first time they do it, I don't say, oh, give it a go and send it in. I say, why don't you look at this, and then I'll have a look at the comments you make, and then I weed out some of the more aggressive things that they say, or some of the over-top things that say, I think you're the most wonderful person on the planet. I mean, neither of those are appropriate. But people do need to be trained to be reviewers. It is not something, you know, not born as a reviewer, any more than you're born a scientist. So I think that are processes that the community as a whole really could put in place to help themselves.
And not only peer reviewers need to be trained, actually at the other end, we judge our peer reviewers. So we ask our panel members to tell which review was not helpful and use that as an example, after anonymizing it, to say, do not write reviews like that, this is not helpful. So a lot of effort goes behind the scenes, which you're not aware of, but be rest assured that, and I think I can say it definitely for the MRC, and I'm sure all the other funders take good care of how to make it as fair as possible. But you know, those are the limitations. So that's one thing. Let's move on, and we've made it very clear that the community needs to make an effort at every stage, applying, reviewing, peer reviewing, collaborating at every stage. It is, as you said, you know, success breeds success at every stage and every part of the cycle. I'm going to whiz through the next ones. I have just one. Okay, right. So this is a very optimistic kind of a statement, which we use sometimes to tell people, you know, don't be afraid to take that big step. Again, incremental things might not help. Maybe you need to go all in and address this. And I think, although we keep saying the field is small, maybe that's an advantage. The field is small enough for people to actually come together and collaborate. If it was very large, then there will be different sections and segments, you know, having to get their research projects and so on, and not coming together in the way, for example, as Mega does. You must be very well aware of these questions when you write grants. What is the hypothesis? What is the long-term plan? Not just what you're going to do, and this is the biomarker you're going to find. How is it going to help 15 years down the line, or maybe even more, or even your own trajectory? What I'm going to emphasize on this one is this bit. Now, all funders, of course, you know, they want to fund the unmet needs, and they want to fund the gaps, and you know, some areas are underfunded. Everybody realizes that, but please don't forget that funders have their own strategies that they have to deliver against as well. And publicly funded organizations such as the MRC have to work and show outcomes against that strategy. Now, suddenly, not one disease area is going to be put up there, whether it is overfunded or underfunded. But what you can do is try to look, what are the MRC's current strategies right now? Where is it that CFSME can find, you know, a home? Where is it that we can align with it? For example, and I said it around to the group earlier, we have a stratified medicine initiative. It was very successful for a certain number of diseases, and now they're going to go out. They want to expand the disease areas. Now, what stratified medicine, as you all know, is to stratify within a population how, in some cases it's called precision medicine, at the MRC we will call it stratified medicine. If we are looking at CFSME and fatigue in general and the different subphenotypes, that is an area where we can think, well, actually, stratified medicine is a priority, maybe, or a strategic priority for MRC. Actually, CFSME is as well, it's a highlighted notice, but then we can align it with that. We can say we want to come in under this initiative, let's get people together, let's try and see how we can stratify these subphenotypes and see if we can then attack it at that, you know, from that angle. Similarly, I don't know, Hugh, whether you'd want to say there is the neuroimmunology you know, initiative that's coming up. Is there something that you can think of, you know, where it might be something that the field also can contribute, need, and then, because you see from a funder, when we're looking at so many different grants from so many different areas, where, and pardon me for calling it that, where you're ticking these boxes, which are right, the field needs it, you know, the country needs it, there is an unmet need, and it fulfills the strategic priority, because that is what is going to uplift your application and make it to a point where it's going to go to triage, be heard, and so on. You want to be heard, and that is the objective. So try and see where you can find areas within the different funders where you can align your strategic priority with the funders' big, you know, the bigger strategic priorities, and see if you can go that way. You always have to answer why now. You may be coming in for granting and again saying, but you can say, why now? Because Mega is coming, so we think we'll have the resource, and if we have the resource, I mean, this may be some year down the line, but we have the resource, that is why now, it's timely. Again, the pressures on funders are also very extreme. We want to fund the best, we want to fund something which is very timely, we want to fund something which will have a, you know, a big output, so value for money, because the money is yours as well, it's publicly funded. So you have to help us make those arguments and not just assume that just because it's underfunded and it's an unmet need, it'll automatically be prioritized. It will be prioritized, but it has to meet these scientific and strategic criteria as well. And of course, the background, the gap to be addressed, I mean, you all are aware of the gaps. With the report now, we are even more aware of the gaps. We know where we have our strengths in epidemiology and in trials and so on. We know where we have the gaps in the biomedical and the mechanism and the markers and so on. So it's very, very clear to us where the gaps are, and I think you can use even the report or that knowledge and what we're building to do with the mega to then convince in your research application why you're looking at what you're looking and why you're looking at it now. Okay, I'm going to distance myself from this code. This is something that a colleague of mine uses quite often. It seems to work from him, but I realize I'm being filmed, so I'm going to just say it was him. But but it is true, and I can't repeat again and again. From my experience of looking at CFSME grants, both successful and unsuccessful, we're trying to do too much in one little research application. It sounds like we're trying to do too much without the background, without the benefit of having the right resource, the right number of people, the right question. So there are two ways you can go. Either you can go mega, or you can look at something but look at it in a very focused way, still showing the larger picture where it's going to contribute, but then try and write your applications in that way. Not too many unrelated questions. It is true we don't know much right now. There's so many biomedical mechanisms and questions and biomarkers that we can pursue, but don't try to do it all in one application. Make it readable. Make it readable even for experts, and I'm not talking of the lay members of the public here, even for experts on the boards. Make it readable so they understand where you're coming from, especially because they may not have seen too many applications from you or this area. Okay. Right. Impact. Don't worry about all that's written there. The question of impact, what it's really asking is so what? You do this and so what? Of course you can divide into two things. You can say academic impact, where is it going to take the field? This is the gap. And you can talk of the economic and the larger impact on society, which we all know. I mean, you can make that argument very well. What is the impact it's making? However, don't just rely on one and think that that's it. Don't just say that there is, and it's affecting too many people, we need a policy, we need treatment and so on, that's it. Show what is the other impact as well. Show what is the academic impact. You are sending your application to a medical research council, you're sending it to a scientific organization. They need to know what is the scientific impact here. Where are you taking the field? And not just that it is for the great and the good of people, because of course it is. You need both aspects, and you need to be able to answer them in a persuasive manner, and you need to be able to address them in a persuasive. Often we see that because of our emotions and because we really feel, because of our passion to make a change in the lives of people with ME, we forget that yes, of course, the science will also address this. You need to highlight both the aspects. You need to highlight why the biomarker you're looking at is the one that is going to lead you to a certain therapeutic target or treatment and so on and so forth, or a mechanism, as well as show that so many number of people are affected by it. There are no treatments, there are now medication and so on for it. The killer approach. Hypothesis we've discussed. Statistics and power. Most of the applications that we've seen fail at MRC have been because of that. And this is just a reminder that actually thus far what we used to do, you put in an application. If you were lucky enough to go through the triage stage, we'll tell you and say, actually you need to address the statistical analysis, sorry, I put my tongue back in the mouth, analysis section better. From the next round onwards, we're going to stop doing that. We're just, whatever you've submitted, whatever analyses you've put in, power calculations, this, that and the other, whether it is for animal studies or for human, that's your last chance. There's going to be no back and forth. And of course, because it is important that the resources you're using, whether animal or human, are justified, that you can show that this is the required number for your study and so on. There's going to be no discussion around this from the next rounds onward. So be very careful, and especially in this field where heterogeneity is a problem. So if you have a small number of patients or samples that you're looking at, and within that we know that there are many subgroups, so it's very heterogeneous data, then your sample size is already not sufficient. So that's going to create more and more problems for you. Address, sometimes you have to use some methodologies which are maybe not not the best out there, maybe because they're too expensive. You want to obviously balance your application and the resource request and so on. If you are using a methodology where you think there are many limitations and questions, address it. Don't leave it to the reviewer to just figure out what you're trying to do and why you're using this particular tool or methodology. It's very important that you use the right tool for the right question, or you end up with something like this. Or worse still, something like this. So if you are using a genome-wide analysis, why are you doing that? If you're using a localized genomic analysis, why is that? Why is one better than the other? Are you going to go, George, who would have spoken yesterday, would be the first to tell you of the limitations, George and Caroline, both of epigenetic studies. But the reason that you're collaborating, the MEGA is collaborating with them, is because they're aware of those limitations. So they can make sure that whatever plans are built with those in mind, so you can address them, rather than just saying, well, that's the answer. So make sure that that argument is made in a good way. And finally, who proposes to do the project is just as important as what it is. Now, in a budding field where we have many early careers that are just coming up, they may rely on the more established people to provide them with that mentorship, that help, even the name, and even the research support. And that is why it's important that within your groups or outside, you find the right people to collaborate with, and you find the right mentors to write your application with. And here the most important bit is the use of appropriate collaboration, which we can't stress enough, especially in this field. And finally, I think it is great that we have the collaborative. I think Lindsay mentioned earlier, when you're writing an application, be it an early career researcher or a more established one, make sure somebody else from outside the field reads it and are able to understand your hypothesis, because that is precisely what's going to happen at one stage or the other during the review process. Somebody who's not in your field will be one of the people who will be assessing your application when they sit around the board. And you have to convince a board of about 26 different experts from different fields. But find mentors for applications. You can go to the collaborative. You have very established and experienced people on the collaborative. Get a second opinion. Again, the collaborative. And Mark Edwards, I hope, is going to put together that group, which we said is going to provide that kind of early steer for applications before they're even put in. Proofread, spell check. Maybe don't go to the collaborative for that, but it's important. Your passion is very great, but and proofread not just for spelling and so on, but actually, are you making sense? Is your hypothesis actually making sense? And that is why I think it's great that even though there's so many challenges in this field, we've come a long way with the collaborative. We have people like you, we have people like Paul, we have Esther and the others, and Stephen, obviously, most of all, who's helped bring this group of people together, use them, utilize them, go to them for mentorship, ask them for who to collaborate with as well. They might not be the one, they might be able to tell you who to go to. And finally, because of that, I think the MEGA, the initiative that's coming together, may answer many basic questions or many basic problems which are sometimes key in making our application failing, and that's numbers. Numbers of your patients, and different subgroups which you can identify, numbers of even different experts you're bringing. You're bringing experts from outside the field. So I think there is some power in numbers at every stage, and I'm very glad that the MEGA is gaining so much interest just in one day from being announced yesterday. And I hope that the collaborative goes from strength to strength, and that you take in mind all these things before we question only one or many funders about that there's lack of investment. Let's work with the funders, let's work with each other to try and make sure that enough applications are in every application round to every funder, and then we can discuss more what then is causing the problem. Right now, you have to be in it to win it.